During the 1950s, the United States State Department and the Hollywood entertainment industry became entangled in conflict and debate. After World War II, fears of communism spread in the United States. Those fears, coupled with the perception of a liberal Hollywood, led to a Hollywood blacklist, where hundreds of actors, writers, and directors were barred from working in Hollywood because of their reputed communist affiliations. Senator Joseph McCarthy and the members of the House Un-American Activities Committee, known as the HUAC, believed the show business industry was a mechanism for spreading politics. Striving to rid Hollywood of communists and their alleged propaganda, Senator Joseph McCarthy and the HUAC changed the way Hollywood functioned and the movies it produced. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Senator Joseph McCarthy conducted a communist investigation within the State Department. After World War II, fears of communism spread in the United States, while at the same time, public opinion regarding American diplomats deteriorated. McCarthy built on these two fears by launching a campaign against the State Department, alleging, "The State Department is infested with communists. I have here in my hand a list of 205, a list of names that were made known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, and who nevertheless are still working and shaping policy in the State Department."
Even if there are only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
Meanwhile, as McCarthy sought to purge the State Department of communist sympathizers, the Hollywood entertainment industry gained a reputation for its left-wing politics. In the years after World War II, Hollywood made a number of anti-racist, pro-Jewish movies. In 1947, for example, director Edward Dmytryk released Crossfire, a movie about an anti-Semitic war veteran who murders a Jewish war veteran. That same year, Elia Kazan directed Gentleman's Agreement, about a reporter who goes undercover as a Jewish person to better understand anti-Semitism. Not only was Hollywood producing political, left-leaning films, but Hollywood workers were also forming labor unions. During the 1930s, large numbers of actors, directors, and screenwriters formed labor unions such as the Writers Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, and the Directors Guild. On October 5, 1945, known today as Hollywood's Black Friday, a 6-month strike by the Set Directors Union erupted into a bloody riot at the gates of Warner Brothers Studios. 25 people were injured. Hollywood's growing union movement, combined with the pro-Jewish themes of their movies, earned Hollywood a reputation for its liberal politics. As Hollywood gained a reputation for having subversive leftist sympathies, it was not long before the HUAC turned its attention to the entertainment industry. In 1947, the HUAC, which had been investigating subversive individuals and organizations since 1938, began to investigate pro-Soviet films that they believed were corrupting America.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
It's unfortunate and tragic that I have to teach this committee the basic principles of Americanism.
That's not the question. The question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I'm framing my answer in the only way in which any American citizen can frame his
Then you
answer to
denied-
a question
then
which
you-
absolutely invades
Then
his
you
right.
denied, you refused to answer that question. Is that correct?
I have told you that I will
All right.
offer my beliefs, my affiliations, and
Here's the
everything
witness.
else
Here's the
to
witness.
the American public, and they will know where I stand, as they do from what I have written.
Stand away.
The HUAC was unconvinced and continued to investigate Hollywood because they knew that TV and movies could shape American attitudes. In addition to going after pro-Russia films, the HUAC went after individuals suspected of being sympathetic to the Communist Party. In 1946, Billy Wilkerson, producer and founder of The Hollywood Reporter, published a column called Trade Views, in which he named people suspected of being communists. This is not an issue that concerns merely a few hundred writers, Wilkerson wrote. It concerns millions of readers who must depend upon the free trade of ideas. It concerns still more millions of children who can't read yet, but who were born with the right to hope for a free world. In 1950, more people were named when the influential anti-communist newsletter Counterattack published their self-proclaimed Bible of the Blacklist, Red Channels, the report of communist influence in radio and television. Red channels accused 151 people, including Orson Welles, Leonard Bernstein, Arthur Miller, Lena Horne, and Edward R. Murrow of being communists. The Hollywood 10 were a group of famous movie directors and writers who refused to cooperate with the HUAC. All of the Hollywood 10 had been members of the Communist Party, and some had been making anti-racist films. Each of the members of the Hollywood 10 were found guilty and sent to federal prison for a 1-year sentence. Disney himself was brought before the HUAC because of a strike at Walt Disney Animation Studios. In response to the HUAC, Walt Disney blamed his employees who had gone on strike. Here's Walt Disney blaming Herbert Sorrell, a Hollywood labor organizer who called the strike against Disney Studios of being a communist.
Well, the result was that he struck. I believed at that time that Mr. Sorrell was a communist because of all the things that I had heard and had seen his name appearing on many of the Commie Front things.
After writers, directors, and actors were accused of being communists by the HUAC, they were on the so-called blacklist, and no one in Hollywood would work with them. To continue working, some sought to clear their names through the clearance process. Ruth Gordon and Marlon Brando, for example, wrote letters denying their involvement. "This is absolutely untrue. I was never a member of the organization," said Gordon. Others continued to work under false pseudonyms. Dalton Trumbo, for example, wrote The Brave One and Roman Holiday under the pen name Robert Rich. Still others, like Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson, fled to Europe where they made movies in exile, such as The Bridge on the River Kwai. Over the years, as Joseph McCarthy investigated more and more people, he gradually lost his influence. According to Ellen Schrecker, author of Age of McCarthyism, once McCarthy became chair of the Senate's Permanent Subcommittee of Investigations in 1953, McCarthy's recklessness increased. It was his investigation of the Army that finally turned public opinion against him and diminished his power. In 1957, his power further weakened when on June 17th, Red Monday, the Supreme Court issued 4 decisions against the policies of McCarthyism. In Yates v. United States, they decided that political opinions were protected by the First Amendment. In Watkins v. United States, they ruled that defendants had the right to refuse to answer a question that discussed private information. In Sweezy v. New Hampshire, they ruled that McCarthy's trials lacked evidence. And in Service v. Dulles, they ruled that the firing of John S. Service for disloyalty violated the State Department's own procedures. The Hollywood blacklist had both short-term and long-term impacts. According to Michael Genovese, professor of political science at Loyola Marymount, the McCarthy era had a chilling effect on Hollywood, and most filmmakers shied away from overt political messages. For roughly the next dozen years, political or social problem films declined, falling victim to the oppressive forces of McCarthyism and the Hollywood blacklist. A long-term effect was that movies had a more corporate business model after the blacklist. Before the blacklist, film production companies were run by one studio mogul. That one person had other staff, but it was more entrepreneurial compared to today. After the blacklist, movies were more often created by large corporations because corporations were harder to take down than single individuals. Some people believe that Hollywood and diplomacy are worlds apart, but the story of the Hollywood blacklist shows that they are closer than they might seem. In the 1950s, fears of communism in the State Department turned into fears of communism in Hollywood, and discouraged 1950s filmmakers from including left-leaning political content in their films. While we might think that the Hollywood blacklist is long behind us, something similar is happening as we speak. Today people get canceled on social media due to their political opinions that some may find as politically incorrect. While in the 1950s it was liberal Hollywood who thought their rights were being trampled, in today's cancel culture, it is often those on the right who fear censorship. This parallel reminds us of important truths. First, that Hollywood, politics, debate, and diplomacy are more intertwined than people think, and second, that we can't pick and choose whose political speech we want to defend.